and welcome to my vlog. My name is Erin and today we are talking about birth control in writing. Hop on board this knowledge train because we are going to the education station. We're going to be covering 3 different types of birth control: historical, modern, and fantasy. So whatever you're writing, you're going to find something here to help you keep those sexy times baby free. Now, obviously, you don't have to mention birth control in your story. This is for people who want to or are curious about the topic in general. If you have personal issues with this topic, kindly scamper away and find something else to watch. So, let's get down to business. Historical birth control. I feel like you'll be surprised by some of the things that are going to be appearing on the historical list, because a lot of them feel like they are very modern inventions, but they've actually been kicking around for a really long time. I know I was definitely surprised when I was doing research for this. So for the purposes of this video, historical birth control is going to cover from ancient times up to the 1920s. Number 1 is pessaries. A pessary is a device that fits inside the vagina up against the cervix, and it actually serves 3 different purposes. The first is obviously that it functions as a birth control, but it can also be used to treat infection and as a support to help deal with pelvic organ prolapse. If you do not know what pelvic organ prolapse is, first do yourself a favor and do not look up pictures. And second, it is basically when the organs in that region can slip out of the vagina because the muscles have gotten too weak to keep everything up in there. There are multiple causes of prolapse, but the most common is going to be pregnancy, childbirth, and labor. As a birth control, a pessary will block the cervix so that sperm can't get up in there, thus reducing the chances of fertilization. Historical pessaries use gummy substances, including dung, pitch, acacia, oils, and honey. These block the cervix and reduce sperm motility. Sometimes they'd also be combined with a wool or other fiber. A more modern version of a pessary would be the contraceptive sponge that was very popular in the early 1900s, cervical caps that were developed in the 1920s, and the diaphragm. Pessaries have been in use since ancient times all over the world, and they are still in use today. Number 2, condoms. Condoms are another thing that are way older than you would expect. The ancient forms were made of animal bladders, leather, linen, silk paper, and animal intestines. The rubber condom was developed in 1855, and the 1920s gave us the modern latex version. Number 3, intracervical and intrauterine devices. So far as I've been able to tell, the first intracervical device was developed in the 1880s. They're also known as stem pessaries and are typically made of rubber, metal, glass, or bone. Essentially, they had a pessary base that would cap the cervix, and a stem would keep it in place. Different versions of these were also developed throughout the 1900s as well. The first intrauterine device was developed in the 1920s, but I will go into these a little bit more in the modern section. Number 4, herbs. Before I get into this, please be advised that many of the herbs I'm going to list can be fatal if ingested. I do not advocate their use for anyone. This is purely for educational purposes so that you can use it in your writing. Silphium is the most famous herbal birth control. It was both a culinary and abortive herb that grew in northern Libya and is now believed to be extinct. Much like huckleberries and wasabi, silphium could not be cultivated. While there were attempts, the seeds that they harvested never actually grew into silphium, so it's thought that it might be some sort of natural hybrid. Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot was used both as a contraceptive and an abortive. The seeds were typically brewed into a tea that would be consumed for several days before sex, and if you were taking it after sex, then you would have to have a much higher dose. Pennyroyal is the most common herb that I've seen referenced in writing when it comes to a character dealing with an unwanted pregnancy. It causes the uterine lining to contract, which triggers menstruation and flushes out any potential embryos. Artemisia or mugwort was used to regulate menstruation and also to start it up if you were potentially pregnant. Myrrh oil is often added to pessaries, and it prevents implantation of any embryos. From what I've researched, most of the herbs seem to work by triggering uterine contractions, which would prevent implantation of any embryos. Some other herbs that also do this are rue, blue cohosh, Chinese angelica, and unripe papaya. There was only one instance of a male herbal contraceptive that I encountered in my research, and that was the consumption of papaya seeds, which supposedly reduces sperm count down to almost 0, rendering them temporarily infertile. Number 5, withdrawal. This is also known as pulling out, and it is not super effective. If you are doing it perfectly every single time, then you have about a 96% rate of success. But if you are like most people and not doing it perfectly every time, that drops down to about 78%. If you are unfamiliar with what the pulling out method is, it basically just requires that the penis bearer come away from the vagina so that no sperm gets up there. Number 6, lactation amenorrhea. This is the breastfeeding method. Some sources say that it is effective up to 3 years if you are exclusively breastfeeding your kid, but modern sources tend to tap out around 6 months. It's possible that there are other factors at play in the past, such as the mother already being malnourished and thus regular amenorrhea is happening. If you are not familiar, amenorrhea is just the abnormal absence of menstruation. And while we're on the subject, there's actually 2 varieties of amenorrhea. There's primary and secondary. Primary is when the period never actually starts with puberty, and secondary is when it's been occurring regularly and then stops. There are multiple reasons why a period might stop, including gynecological disorders, illness, stress, medication, having a very low body fat ratio, or pregnancy. Number 7, abstinence. This one is still preached a lot and it sucks. I'm all for people waiting until they feel ready, but in my opinion, abstinence-only education is harmful because all it does is leave people unprepared. If you are not familiar, abstinence just means that you don't have sex. Number 8, fertility awareness method. This method means that you've got to be aware of your own cycle because you'll have high fertility days and low fertility days. If you have a regular cycle, this becomes much easier to track, and basically you just only have sex on the low fertility days. People have been using this since ancient times, but it didn't super get finessed until the 1900s when they figured out which hormones were at play. Number 9, sterilization. I'm going to start this off by saying that sterilization has been a big thing for the eugenics movements, which means a lot of people, particularly women of color, have been forcefully sterilized against their will. This is a horrible thing that still occurs in a lot of places because some people are huge assholes. So be aware of that if it is popping up in your stories. Hysterectomies were first performed in 1843, and that involves removing part or all of the uterus. The first tubal ligation was performed in 1823, and that basically involves the fallopian tubes being sealed off so that eggs can't pass through and thus cannot be fertilized. Vasectomy has gained popularity in the 1920s, but the much more extreme version, castration, has been around since ancient times. Castration involves the removal of all or part of the external male genitalia. Number 10, infanticide. This is not a very pleasant topic, but it was and is still used across the globe to eliminate unwanted children. The most common variant of infanticide that I encountered in my research and in other media was children being left out in the open to die of exposure. On to modern birth control. We've covered so many in the historical section that there's very few left for the actual modern world to have invented and implemented. The best advance in birth control is that we now have hormonal options. The hormonal options include the pill, the patch, the ring, the shot, the implant, and hormonal IUDs. The 1960s brought us the oral contraceptive known as the pill, but it was not until the 1970s that access to birth control was available to all Americans regardless of marital status. The 90s brought us the implant and the shot. The shot typically works for about 3 months at a time, and the implant lasts up to 4 years. And the 2000s, last but not least, gave us the modern version of the IUD, the patch, and the vaginal ring. The hormonal IUD lasts for 5 to 10 years depending on the brand. The patch is replaced weekly, and the ring lasts for a month at a time. There is tons of information out there about modern contraceptive methods, so I'm not going to give you a whole list of info here because it's very easily accessible for you to look up yourself. If your characters are having sex in a modern story, you should probably be mentioning birth control considering how prevalent it is. Choose whatever variety makes sense for your character. Now on to fantasy birth control. Fantasy birth control is often not very complex at all, so I will keep this section short. Options that I have encountered in a fantasy setting are amulets, charms, potions, teas, and spells. If you are developing a fantasy birth control, here are some questions to ask yourself. How quickly does it take effect? Does it prevent conception, or does it eliminate any that has already occurred? Does it have to be regularly consumed, and how often? How long does it last? What are the side effects? And does it have any impact on fertility? In fantasy stories, you might also be running into interspecies relationships. If your peeps are going to be having a viable offspring that is an offspring that can itself reproduce, then that means that they are the same species. If your pair can have offspring, but their offspring cannot themselves reproduce, then they are almost the same species, but not quite. You'll definitely want to know who's going to be able to knock up who if a bunch of your characters are going to the bone zone. And one other topic to consider with this is infertility. Can your characters even get pregnant? There are tons of reasons why getting pregnant might be difficult. Some things that can affect both sides of the equation are STIs, genetic conditions, very low or very high body weights, cancer and cancer treatments, environmental factors, etc. Some things that would affect the sperm bearers are abnormal sperm production, abnormal sperm function, ejaculation issues, structural sperm blockages, etc. Some things that would affect the uterus bearer are ovulation disorders, uterine or cervical abnormalities, fallopian tube damage or blockage, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, early menopause, pelvic adhesions, etc. There are just so many things that can go on that can mess up someone's ability to get pregnant or get someone pregnant. So that is all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to be notified as soon as I upload, then ring that bell. All my social media links will be in the description below. Both of my books, Olympian Confessions, Hades and Persephone, and Olympian Confessions, Hera, are available now in ebook and paperback. If you'd like your book critiqued by me, you can check out my new critique service on my website. If you've enjoyed my content and learned something, consider being part of my Patreon family. And I will see you all next week for another vlog. Bye!